I acquired a house for $50,000, funded by the elderly man's finances. Vivian proudly displayed her bank book, enthusiastically boasting about the purchase. Despite my attempts to maintain composure and avoid being easily surprised, I couldn't stifle my laughter. In this moment, Vivian questioned my amusement, prompting me to explain. However, instead of expressing shock, I continued to laugh heartily in her presence. After a prolonged bout of laughter and the inability to articulate words, I regained my composure. Addressing Vivian, I apologized, saying, "Sorry for you." She seemed perplexed, prompting me to sadly point at the bank book she held. "My name is Rita, and ever since I married a man 10 years my senior, I've been a target of gossip. My husband, already wealthy with multiple companies and ample resources, was considered a catch. People assumed I married him for his money, given the age difference. However, the truth was different. My husband had experienced poverty in his earlier life, abandoned by his gambling-addicted father, leaving him and his mother in a small apartment. As the landlord's daughter in that building, I had no peers my age. Consequently, my future husband, 10 years older than me, became my playmate. Despite my attraction to him, I never coveted his wealth. Our paths diverged when he moved to New York, but we continued corresponding. Each time I confessed my feelings, he responded with a dismissive, "When you're older." This pattern persisted through middle school and high school. Despite the rejection, I remained steadfast. Even when he told me I was too young in high school, I persisted. Our connection endured during his time away, and when I entered university, he issued a conditional response. He suggested that if, after broadening my perspectives and meeting new people, I still harbored feelings for him, he would reciprocate. Throughout my 4 years at university, my unwavering feelings persisted. Upon graduation, I confessed once more. Bashfully, he admitted, "You're the only one who's loved me this much." And we officially began dating. At 23, fresh out of university and embarking on my career, I shared my life with a man of 33 who had already established himself in New York with successful business ventures. Eager to marry him, I patiently awaited his promise to tie the knot once his company achieved success. Living together, I diligently managed household chores and prepared his favorite meals, all the while questioning if he truly cared for me. Direct inquiries led him to admit that he initially considered my affection during our elementary and middle school years as a mere childish crush. However, as my declarations persisted through high school and college, he began to feel shy and acknowledge the depth of my feelings. Worried during my college years that I might find someone else, he shared that he had never dated before due to focusing on studying and overcoming his impoverished background. Despite the skepticism surrounding our age gap, we were confident in our commitment and dismissed the notion of betrayal. With a $12 million asset, we encountered assumptions that our relationship was driven by financial motives or future insurance benefits. While some recognized our long history, others stubbornly clung to stereotypes about wealthy individuals. In social settings, gossip surrounded us, but my husband, despite the frowns, encouraged me to ignore it. Unaffected by external opinions, our love remained steadfast, bolstered by my husband's unwavering trust. Several years into our marriage, we welcomed our eldest son, Peter, followed by our second son, Dan, the next year. Despite financial comfort, we chose not to disclose our wealth to them, teaching them the value of money from elementary school. They received allowances for household chores and learned financial management through unique piggy banks and account books. Our upbringing seemed to have a lasting impact. By the time Peter and Dan reached high school, rather than asking for pocket money, they expressed a desire to work for what they wanted. Peter secured a job at a cafe, while Dan found employment at a bookstore. Their mutual respect for each other's interests filled me with anticipation for their futures, a sentiment echoed by my husband. He remarked, "I'm excited to see what kind of women they'll end up with." I responded, acknowledging the evolving nature of relationships in contemporary times, whether it be someone of the same gender or choosing a single life. Sharing a laugh, my husband and I agreed that as long as our sons were happy, that's what truly mattered. Our aspirations were simple. We wanted our two sons to find happiness in whatever path they chose. Little did we anticipate that our eldest son's choice of a life partner would prompt us to exclaim, "You're marrying her?" One day, Peter approached us during a family dinner after he and Dan had graduated from university, started working, and moved out. In a celebratory atmosphere, he shared, "I want to introduce a woman to you, Mom and Dad. I've been dating her, and I'm thinking of marrying her in the future." Rita, my husband, and Dan responded with excitement, expressing their eagerness to meet her. Peter brought the woman, Vivian, to our house, and her first reaction was a wide-eyed admiration of our home. "Wow, what a fantastic house! This is what a wealthy family's home looks like. Someday, I'll be living in this house too. How wonderful!" she exclaimed while gazing around. Peter watched her with a fond smile. As we greeted them, Vivian introduced herself as a model, though she used a stage name. She asked if we knew her, and I admitted that I occasionally looked at magazines but never paid much attention to the models, leading to a candid no from me. Vivian nodded in understanding, and then, to my surprise, remarked, "I guess you might be younger than my father-in-law, but you're still quite old. So you probably don't read the kind of magazines I appear in, huh?" I was taken aback, questioning if I had just been insulted. The idea of being mocked by my future daughter-in-law at our first meeting seemed unimaginable. However, considering I don't often read magazines featuring models around her age, her comment might have been accurate. I reassured myself that she likely didn't mean any harm. Trying to shift the conversation, I asked about Vivian and Peter's relationship. She inquired if we had an arranged marriage due to the 10-year age gap, to which I clarified that we didn't. She then shared that she and Peter were in a love marriage, prompting her curiosity about how we managed to stay together for so long. Her probing continued, questioning if our marriage was unwanted and how we navigated the age difference. I couldn't help but think of the irony, considering the length of time I had harbored a crush on my husband before our marriage. However, I emphasized that comparing the length of our romances was pointless, highlighting that we too had a love marriage. In disbelief, Vivian responded, "Really? No way. Are you sure you're not just pretending for the money?" The topic of money arose, reminiscent of those who accused me of marrying my husband for his wealth. Hearing this, Peter finally interjected, stating, "My parents really had a love marriage. You can tell by the way they are together." Vivian ceased her inquiries with a dismissive ha. When Peter escorted Vivian home, both my husband and Dan were left stunned and appalled by her shocking remarks. The question lingered in their minds, is my brother really going to marry that kind of woman? Concerned about his brother's choice, Dan, holding his head, wondered aloud about the abundance of nice women available for Peter. I comforted him, suggesting that Peter might be covering for her and addressing her behavior privately. Despite their complex expressions, my husband and Dan seemed to agree with my assessment. Our family decided to celebrate the impending marriage of Peter and Vivian. However, even after the marriage was settled, Vivian made a demand, insisting that the groom's family give a gift of $10,000 per person. Peter, however, silenced her by stating that the standard amount was sufficient. This calmed Vivian down, but her agitation revealed that Peter needed to maintain a firm hand to build a stable home. Choosing not to worry about their household dynamics, my husband Dan and I allowed time to pass. Eventually, my husband passed away due to illness and aging. Surprisingly, those who had once speculated that I married him for his wealth came to see me as a devoted wife. People who had the chance to speak with my husband knew that he had cleared up any misunderstandings about our relationship. At the funeral, no one cast suspicious glances my way. However, one person stood out with eyes shining with excitement: Vivian, Peter's wife. She maintained silence during the funeral, but shortly after, she visited our house, proudly displaying a bank book. With a smirk, she announced, "I've always been stopped by Peter, but this time he agreed with my plan. It's the end for you now." Confused by her cryptic words, I had no idea what she meant by the end. With that bank book, she proceeded to boast about buying a house for $500,000 with the old man's money, a reference to my deceased husband. Watching Vivian show off the bank book, I couldn't help but burst into laughter, realizing the significant mistake she had made based on her own words in that very bank book. Despite my attempts to remain calm and composed since my husband's death, I couldn't contain my laughter. When questioned about my laughter, I refrained from giving Vivian the satisfaction of a defeated response. Instead, I continued laughing in front of her, not allowing her the reaction she anticipated. After a while, I managed to stop laughing and said, "Sorry for you, huh?" She seemed puzzled, prompting me to suddenly point at the bank book in her hand, saying, "Look at the name carefully." Her confusion deepened as she inspected the bank book, and suddenly she exclaimed, "Wait, this is Peter's bank book." Witnessing her realization, I burst into laughter again. It wasn't my intention to mock her, but the memory of her boasting with Peter's bank book, falsely claiming to spend my husband's money. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Ha ha! The first character of Peter's name and my husband Paul's name are the same, right? So ha ha ha, you got it mixed up, I chuckled. Vivian, flustered, pleaded, "Hey, wait, don't laugh at me." I seriously thought it was my father-in-law's bank book, but I even took his ID. I borrowed it after the funeral from where? From a black bag everyone carries to a funeral. Hi ha ha, I continued laughing, holding my stomach. As it turned out, the bag from which she took the bank book belonged to her own husband, Peter. She had mistakenly believed it to be my deceased husband's bank book. But I bought a house for $500,000 with it. Do you have $500,000 to borrow a house? Would you pass the mortgage screening? She stammered. Well, that Peter was with me, so I had him do it, I replied, finding the situation increasingly hilarious. Vivian had discovered the bank book in her husband Peter's bag and must have suggested buying a house with the account holder Peter. Seeing the amount in the bank book, she proposed buying a house for $500,000. Since Peter and Vivian were living in an apartment, Peter might have thought it was time to buy a house. For Peter, it was simply buying a house with his own earned money, but Vivian mistook it for my husband's bank book and thought she could use it. Not being the account holder, I assumed it was the bank book with my husband's insurance money in it. As the beneficiary of my husband's insurance, any money transferred would go into my account. Besides, normally, you can't use the account of someone who has passed away. Vivian's face turned red at my words. Soon after, Peter and Vivian's parents appeared at our house. Peter casually approached Vivian, and her parents, looking pale, came to me, bowing repeatedly. They'd apologized for their daughter's rudeness. As I listened, surprised, Vivian's parents explained what had happened. After Peter and Vivian decided to buy a house and completed the contract, an excited Vivian texted her mother, "Got a mansion with the dead father-in-law's insurance money. I'll invite you over once we move in." Now I'm going to brag to the money-hungry mother-in-law about buying a house with the money she was supposed to get. Panicked, her mother showed the message to her father, and they both contacted Peter in a hurry. Peter, calmly responding, brought them to our house. I'd always kept an eye on Vivian, expecting her to mess up sometimes, but I never thought she'd mix up my bank book with Dad's. Peter and I laughed as much as we could when we realized Vivian's mistake. Vivian's parents told her to apologize, their faces still pale, but Peter and I continued to laugh, creating a chaotic scene. Once we stopped laughing, Vivian's parents apologized, and a flustered Vivian also apologized to us. I assured them, saying, "Oh, it's all right. In the end, I haven't suffered any harm." I told Vivian and her parents not to apologize, but they insisted, saying, "No, we know you two had a love marriage and were together before your husband built his fortune. We saw your husband on a TV program talking about how you two met. My wife and I were so moved by your love story." As I exclaimed in surprise, Peter sitting next to me explained, "Ah, I thought Mom didn't know." Dad couldn't stand seeing Mom misunderstood, so he talked about it everywhere, and it reached the ears of a TV station. They thought it was a great story and broadcasted how Mom and Dad met. Was that what he was asking about a few years ago when he wanted to tell people our story? I realized the legacy my husband had left behind, and our daughter had caused such a disgrace. When Dan, the younger son, heard about it later, he said, "I just can't understand my brother's thinking," looking skyward. When I asked Peter why he loved her so much, he replied with a laugh, "She's never boring to watch." Remembering how he made me laugh during my grief after my husband's death, I felt I understood what he meant. Being with her probably meant no time for minor worries or sulking. Though Vivian did what she did, she had been without an allowance for a while and recently started working at my favorite cafe. Whether she was embarrassed by how much I laughed at her, scolded by her parents, or heard in detail about mine and my husband's love story from them, I'm not sure. Lately, she's been calling me ma'am and treating me more respectfully. For a while, I think I'll continue visiting this cafe, watching Peter's wife grow and change,